In the last lesson, we learned how to use the while loop and the do while loop in C++. Today, we will discover the other type of loop in C++, which is the for loop. A for loop is a type of loop in C++ that you should know, and it is a loop that will keep on repeating a certain block of code multiple times as long as the condition evaluates true. If the condition evaluates false, definitely the for loop will terminate. Let us see the basic structure of a for loop. So a for loop, it's written like this, and inside parentheses comes three things. The first thing is the initializer, and the initializer is simply a variable, or a variable that acts as a counter, okay? Next comes the condition, and the condition, if the condition is true, the for loop will repeat the certain block of code, and if the condition is false, that means the for loop will terminate. Next comes the increment and decrement, so either increment or decrement, okay? And you basically increment or decrement the initializer. Now I know nothing makes sense because we're not practicing this formula right here. So let's go ahead and see it right here in the main. Let's say I want to print on the console the numbers from 1 to 5. So basically I am starting from 1 and ending at 5. Let's go ahead and do it with a for loop. So this is the basic structure of a for loop. Now let us start with defining the initializer. And again, the initializer is simply a variable that will act as a counter. So let's say the initializer will be int I, and I is the name of the variable, and it is very common in any programming language that we name the initializer as I, and sometimes we name it as j. Well, let's go with I, okay? And because I'm starting with 1, it will make sense for me to initialize it as 1. Now what about the condition? So basically, if I want to stop at 5, that means at some point I will become greater than 5. And so what if I say something like this, I less than or equal to 5? So basically at each iteration we are incrementing I by 1. So at some point I will become greater than 5. So I will become 6. So when I become 6, this condition will evaluate false. That means my loop can terminate. So now we need to increment I by 1. So I could say I++. Like this, at each iteration I'm incrementing I by 1. And because the condition here can be achievable, because once I become greater than 5, so 6, the condition will terminate. Let's just go ahead and see it. So if I say something like round, well, I, for example, like this, let's go ahead and see what will happen in the console. So I'll go ahead and compile then launch. As you can see, around 1 till 5. So basically we start with 1, and so 1 less than or equal to 5, yes. This block of code will be executed, and then we will increment I by 1, so I will become 2, and then we will go in this condition and we will repeat this block of code multiple times until we print, for example, the round 5 right here. When this one will be printed, I will be incremented again, so it will become 6. So is 6 less than or equal to 5? No, so the condition will terminate. Okay, so this is the for loop. And if you want, for example, to print on the console round 5 till 1, so you are going backwards if you want. So how to do this? Well, to do this, you need to start from 5, right? So it will make sense to start from 5 because you want to print from 5 till 1. So it will make sense to start from 5. But the increment here doesn't make sense because we want to increment at each iteration. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it will make sense to replace it with a decrement. But the condition here also doesn't make sense because if I keep it like this, let's go ahead and see what will happen. I should get something called an infinite loop. As you can see, I'm getting an infinite loop because my condition is always true and it's not false. So let's go ahead and see what we could do with this condition. So again, why did we got an infinite loop? Because our condition is always true. And when the condition is always true, that means we will get an infinite loop if we don't try to stop it. Okay? So basically at some point, I will become equal to 1. And 1 will be printed, right? And so when 1 will be printed, I will become 0 because we will decrement it by 1. So it will make sense for me to say something like this. So if I change the condition to I greater than 0, so as long as I is greater than 0, I want to execute the following block. But when I becomes equal to 0, this condition will evaluate false. That means my loop will terminate. Let's go ahead and see it. So as you can see, 5 till 1, because at some point, I will become equal to 0. And so is 0 greater than 0? So no, the condition is false. That means the for loop will terminate. So here's a simple exercise we will do. We will build a program that prints even if the number is even, but prints odd if the number is odd, but also stops when the loop or the number is 7. Okay, and we should use a for loop. Let us see how we'll do it. So let's say the range of numbers will be from 0 to 9. So 10 numbers, okay? So if I want to start from 0, that means it will make sense to initialize I as 0, right? Also, because I want only 10 numbers, that means 0 to 9, these are 10 numbers. I could say something like this: I less than 10. So as long as I less than 10, I want to execute the following block, right? And because I need to increase at each iteration, that means I need to increment. So at each iteration, we increment by 1. And at some point, we'll reach I equal to 10. And so this condition will evaluate false, okay? So now let's go ahead and check if the number, which is I, is even or odd. So if it is even, I'll print even. If it is odd, I'll print odd. So it will make sense for me to use an if block or if and else statement. So the condition inside the if will be the following: if I mod 2 equal to 0. So basically, to find if a number is even or odd, you need to divide the number by 2, and if the remainder of this division is 0, that means it is even, otherwise it is false. The modulus operator allows us to, or it will give us the remainder of a division. So here I'm dividing I by 2 and getting the remainder of this division. So if the remainder of this division is equal to 0, that means the number is even. So I could print something like even, like this. And I could point at the number so we can know in the console which number we're talking about. So if this condition evaluates false, that means the number is not even, it is odd. So I could say something like odd, like this, and let's see, and let's point at the number, so I like this. So like this, we did half of the exercise. So let's go ahead and see first of all what this will do. I'll first of all clear the interface, and then now I will compile and then launch. As you can see, even, 0, so 0 is even, 1 is odd, 2 is even, 3 is odd, and so on. You get the idea. We stop at 9 because 0 till 9, these are 10 numbers, and so the condition here is I less than 10, and at some point I will become equal to 10, so this condition will evaluate false, okay? And so now let's continue with the exercise. We need to stop the loop when the number is 7. So I'm going to create a separate condition, or a separate if block if you want, like this. And now I need to check when I becomes equal to 7, like this. Simple if block. But how do we stop a for loop? So to stop a for loop or any loop, we can use the break keyword. So the break keyword, we actually saw it in the last video when we used the while loop. Also, we saw it when in the switch statement. But what the break keyword does is, when the compiler reads break, what it will do is it will exit out of the for loop. So it will completely stop the execution of the for loop and continue the flow of the program. So let's go ahead and see it. As you can see right now, we stopped at 6. So at some point the counter or the I will become 7, and this condition will still evaluate true. However, this condition right here also evaluates true, and inside of it we have the keyword break. So even if the condition right here is true, when the compiler reads the keyword break, what it will do is it will exit from the for loop completely. So it will not continue to the next iteration. It will exit out of the for loop and continue the flow of the program. So this is break, okay? Now I want to show you another keyword called continue. What if I say something like continue right here? Okay, let me go ahead and clear the interface and let's see what will happen. Okay, so I'm going to launch the code. As you can see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's no 7, 8, and 9. So what exactly happened here? So what happened is that as soon as I is equal to 7, we have the continue keyword. That means what it will do is it will completely ignore the 7 or this iteration, which is 7. And what it will do is that it will jump to the next iteration, which is the number 8. So if you want, it skip the number 7 and jump to the number 8. So this is what continue does. It will skip this iteration and go to the next iteration. So that is why in the console, we didn't got 7, okay? So this is the keyword break and the keyword continue. Okay, so here's the last exercise for today. We want to create a for loop that allows the user to input random numbers 5 times and find their sum. So basically, first of all, if we want the user to input something, we need a variable that will store the input of the user, right? And it will be an integer because we need integers. Let me initialize it to 0. And then we need a variable that will hold the sum of the input of the user. And I will also initialize it to 0. Now we need a for loop. So inside the for loop, we will start with the initializer. So I'll say int j, for example, equal to 0. And the condition will be j less than 5. So basically, we need 5 times, 5 iterations. So when we start from 0, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are 5 numbers, so 5 times. But if you decide to initialize j to 1, what you need to do here is fix the condition and make it j less than or equal to 5. Because if you don't add the equal, that means you are excluding 5. So you are saying only 1, 2, 3, 4. These are only 4 iterations. That is why you need to add the equal sign like this, so you can include 5 in your iteration. Okay, so I'll go with this method, no problem. And now let's go ahead and increment j by 1 at each iteration. Now let's go ahead and receive input from the user. So I could say input number like this, and then we could use cin to receive the input. So cin like this, and store it inside the input of the user variable. Now what I want to do here is I want to find the sum of the input of the user. So find the sum of all the random numbers that the user will input. So what I could do here is I will simply say sum plus equal to input of the user, where it is, so input of the user, like this. So at each iteration, the user will give me a different number. And what I will do is that I'll simply add it with the sum variable. So at the end, I will have the sum of all the inputs that the user will give me. Let's go ahead and try it. So I'll clear the interface like this and go ahead and go to compile and then launch. So input number, let's say 12, 14, 16, 18, and then 20, for example. And I forgot to print or see out the sum. So excuse me, I forgot to see out the sum. So see out like this, sum and L. Okay, let's go ahead and then compile again and launch. So let me say 12, 13, or whatever, 14, 15, and 16. As you can see, this is the sum of all these random numbers that the user inputted. So if you want to see what's happening at each iteration, what I could do here is I could copy this and paste this right here, paste this expression right here. So let's go ahead, compile, and then go ahead and launch. As you can see, input number 12. So sum is equal to 12 right now, because at the beginning, sum is equal to 0. Then what we did here is we added input of the user. Input of the user stores the input of the user, which is 12 in our case. So sum plus equal to 12, which is 12 because 0 plus 12 is 12. Okay, let's go ahead to the next iteration. So I said 13, we'll get 25, 14, 39, 15, 54, and then 16, we got 70, so the output is 70. These are 5 iterations, so 5 input from the user, and at the end we got the sum of these numbers that the user gave randomly. And this is it for the for loop in C++. Make sure to check out the latest lesson about the while loop and do while loop in C++ to discover the other type of loop. Now thank you for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date for the next lesson, and now I invite you to click on one of these end screens that will appear right now, and I hope to see you in the next video.